Tom. Thank you, COERLL, and everybody else who's helped to sponsor this. I feel like after hearing Pramit's wonderful presentation, I could throw my talk completely away and just base it off of him. Some of you may already sense some of the similarities, talking about Virgil, for example, who's Dante's guide in the afterlife. Statius turns out to be a very important poet in terms of intertextuality, is a character in Dante's poem as well. Capaneus, even your very first little example, is a major example. So where Juno, I think you said, is the one who said she would move hell, I'm going to show you hell through Dante's Inferno. You can see from the title slide here, it's not all about Dante. I'm sure some of you, my generation perhaps in particular, recognize that guy, a former UT student, by the way, John Hamm. The Mad Men TV series had a very strong intertextual relationship with Dante's Inferno, which I've actually written about, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm not going to be talking so much about what's going on in Italy, but many of you probably know the Italian actor, comedian, director Roberto Benigni, a winner of an Academy Award a few years back for Life is Beautiful. But he has devoted much of the last 10 years actually to reciting, performing, is probably the better word, very famous episodes of Dante's Divine Comedy in the Piazza and on Italian television. Tutto Dante, all Dante, he calls it. So Dante very much has been in the Piazza in Italy over the last 10 years. So I'm going to start here by going backwards. I know we're supposed to be talking about the future here, but I'm going to bring us back to the 1300s for a second to sort of set the stage for my discussion. And not even to Dante here, but to another famous Italian writer, Giovanni Boccaccio, best known as the author of Decameron, obviously. But he's also the first biographer of Dante, and in some ways he's the first Dante professor, the first person to actually teach Dante publicly. And the way he did that, you can see his dates here, it's toward the end of his life, that he actually is commissioned, paid from the commune of Florence to deliver these public lectures in Florence. And he does this for about a year and a half or so, and then he's getting old and ill, and he eventually gives it up. But these lectures are very important. They take place in this building here, the Badia in Florence, which is one of the oldest churches there. Origins date to the 900s. It would have been more or less completed in its current form during Dante's lifetime in the 1200s, and 1310 or so is when you have this very famous bell tower. You can see the Palazzo Vecchio, the more famous Italian building right behind it, also from the Middle Ages. But what's significant about what Boccaccio does is he delivers these lectures in public to a very mixed audience. It's not just to fellow scholars, academics, literature people, but also to sort of anybody who really can understand Italian. Merchants, people from the rising social classes in Italy can attend them. And he decides to deliver them not in Latin, as he could have. Boccaccio actually writes mostly in Latin, except for the Decameron and a few other works, but he delivers them in the vernacular. He delivers them in the Italian language of the day, in fact, so that other people can understand them. And he's doing something that I'm going to talk about today. My talk is really more of a meta talk, I think, in part because the timing of this symposium is absolutely wonderfully perfect for me. This is almost literally the 10-year anniversary, as Tom was saying, of this Danteworlds project, which we developed here at the University of Texas. I think it pretty much went online in 2015 or so, the entire project. So it's been a really wonderful opportunity for me to kind of reflect back on the project, think about it, but also to think about it in relationship to what we're calling the digital humanities. So one of the things you'll see as I get into the Danteworlds project is how complementary it is to the sort of work that Pramit has just displayed here. I'm working obviously also with an older text or older authors, but it's going to be more of a content-based project. In other words, much of what's going into the project is the original content that I and some others are creating, as opposed to the manipulation of data, the use of the text that are already there. So I think of those as sort of complementary, perhaps, strands. Sometimes they come into a direct relationship with one another, sometimes not, but they're complementary strands of what we do in the digital humanities. The other thing, and this is true, I think, of both these projects, is it's a way in which we bring the research we do, the scholarship we do, into the classroom, and vice versa. I think you'll probably have experienced this too, that sometimes the things that you're doing in the classroom, many of us have this experience as professors, then give us an idea for something to do in our scholarship. So one of the themes that I've always been talking about in my career as an academic is the reciprocity, the very fruitful interdependence of scholarship and teaching. It's something that we all talk about, I think. Administrators, everybody talks about it. It's hard to sometimes really put it into practice, though. And I do think many of these digital humanities projects are opportunities to do specifically that. So the research that we saw in Promit's project leading to the class that he then teaches, certainly I developed my project out of the classes that I teach here at the University of Texas. I teach Dante pretty much every semester, one or more times. But then it also goes in the other direction as well. But the other reason I brought up Boccaccio is he's also bringing that reciprocity of scholarly commentary and research and teaching in terms of presenting it to the public. He's bringing it to a broader audience. He's taking it outside of the ivory tower, so to speak, and he's bringing it down into the piazza. He's bringing it down to a place where other people. So as we work in the humanities and we talk about all the challenges that we face today working in the humanities, the public face of the humanities becomes a very, very important part of what we do. So as I reflect on Danteworlds, I'm going to walk us through some of the project, but I'm also going to take it beyond the project to the afterlife of Danteworlds, so to speak, and show how I've tried to bring some of that work into a greater public awareness to the public sphere. This just goes back from Florence, medieval Florence, to Austin, Texas, about a month ago here. We hosted, I think Tom alluded to the MLA, the Modern Language Association. For the first time, the MLA held its annual conference here in Austin, I think. And was anybody else there besides me? A couple of you I know, probably. Yeah, a few people I recognize. I think it was a great success. We had nice weather, right? People probably liked coming here as opposed to going to Toronto or Chicago or Philadelphia in the middle of the winter. It actually had a theme that I think relates very much to what I'm talking about today in terms of digital humanities, and again, the public. The literature and its public's past, present, future was our kind of umbrella theme. Doesn't mean every session had to do with that, but many of them sort of touched on that. And I quoted this here from the president of the MLA. He wrote a column not long before the conference, and I think it gets at what I'm talking about in terms of the humanities and the public. He says, "I see it, our challenge is to reconnect interpretation as it happens in the student's response in writing or on video, the assistant professor's conference paper, and the senior scholar's book with the public face of our discipline." And I think the middle part of that we could probably interpret different ways, add things, subtract things. But the purple text there, "Our challenge is to reconnect interpretation with the public face of our discipline," I think is something that many of us, perhaps as we get a little bit older in the profession, are seeing as becoming much more important as we go forward. And so that, in some sense, is what Boccaccio was doing, and that's something that I think Danteworlds and many other digital humanities projects are very, very good at doing. So here's Danteworlds. This is the opening page here. You can see the three realms of Dante's Divine Comedy. You can't maybe read the small print here, but it's going to be a very multimedia, integrated multimedia sort of project with images, some audio and textual commentary, study questions, etc. And everything is going to be presented, and this is where the Danteworlds project differs from some of the other very, very fine digital Dante projects. Everything is going to be presented geographically. So it's going to essentially put us in Dante's shoes as he goes through the circles of hell, climbs the mountain of purgatory, and eventually traverses the spheres of paradise. So the textual order will be less important, let's say, than the actual geographic progression through the underworld. And the reason I focus so much on that is anybody who studies the Divine Comedy, one of the things you learn, if you don't just hear it from your teacher on the first day, is what a visual poet Dante is. In other words, you have to kind of try to imagine, you have to see what he says he saw as he sort of makes this journey to actually kind of understand what's going on and actually to get to different levels of interpretation and meaning. And I found that to be such an important part of my pedagogy as I was teaching the Divine Comedy that eventually I thought, if I'm going to do a digital sort of project, I want to do it in such a way that it really takes advantage of what we call the visual poetics of the Divine Comedy. The other part of the Divine Comedy that you might know, even if you haven't read the whole thing, is it's an encyclopedic sort of work. Interdisciplinary. We saw the interdisciplinarity in Promit's project with a biologist, doing work with a philologist and bringing those together. Dante in the late Middle Ages is a living embodiment of what we would call interdisciplinarity, as many educated people of that time are. And so the Divine Comedy, you have to bring together the myth and the history, the classics, the Bible, political history, the Middle Ages, et cetera. All of that has to sort of be brought into discussions in ways that are understandable, especially for students if you're trying to teach that. So the encyclopedism and the visual poetics are the two things that sort of motivated me to undertake this project. The other thing was when I was a graduate student, and I had a year as an assistant, a research assistant for my mentor, my professor. I was in Florence, and I spent the whole year in that area where the Badia is, in a very, very old medieval building where the Dante Society of Italy is located. And all I did every day is I read the commentaries. I read these old commentaries, and I tried to sort of take what was important from them and to construct a new commentary. And what I learned very quickly in this process, even as a 24-year-old graduate student, 25-year-old graduate student, was that I was kind of working in an echo chamber. In other words, I was reading all these Italian commentators down through the, the 1970s, 1980s, into the 1990s, and they were often repeating one another, and they would use the same kind of reference to an intertextual passage from Virgil or Ovid, and it would just sort of get passed on and on and on, and that was a very easy way for there to be these multiple editions and commentaries of Divine Comedy. And as I started to study Latin, because you need to do that to be a Dante scholar, and I started to read Ovid and Virgil, I thought, but why didn't they mention that passage? Or what happened with that? And then when you read the medieval, or the other Latin writers like Statius, who aren't quite as famous, but are so important for somebody, or Lucan, who are so important for Dante, you start to see more and more and more. And so I realized, I have to write my own commentary, don't I? I have to sort of get to the sources that fire Dante's imagination. Some of what I'm saying certainly is going to be repeating or in dialogue with other commentators over the 700 years of Dante criticism it has gone on, but I'm going to find new sorts of insights. That's going to be my contribution, an original contribution to scholarship. So it was a combination of bringing together that commentary tradition and finding the new insights. And also, I realized at some point, I have a degree in computer science. I did. So I thought, wow, this is perfect, right? I don't need to do the coding anymore. I'll find somebody here at UT who can do that better than I can, but I can at least work with that person. I'll need a graphic design artist. I can't paint or draw for anything, so I'm really going to need help there. And UT had a wonderful person, Saloni Robertson. We're going to see some of her amazing illustrations here. And so we formed a little team, and we got funded generously here from UT, and that's what enabled us to bring all of these different pieces together. As an aside, I would just say that one of the real beauties, I think, of working in this field, if we want to call it that, is the collaborative community sort of basis for it. So it's not just that people working in these digital projects are so generous with one another, but you work with a team. And as humanists, it depends on what we do, but many of us, work by ourselves as monks in the library for long periods of time. And for a very social person like me, I really like working with 2 or 3 other people at the same time. So it's certainly, I don't know if you had that experience, Pramit, but just working, as part of this team, undergraduates, as you say, graduate students, other people, and on the technical side is a very, very energizing sort of experience. So, so this is the way the Danteworlds webpage appears, and then you can see hell is basically, these are all Saloni's illustrations here. Hell is basically a funnel, the famous 9 circles of hell. You start from the top and you kind of work your way down here. I'm just going to show you screenshots here, but you can get into the website at any point and see some of your own things here. You can see here, if I were just mousing over this, I would get the different regions. So I just happen to be on circle 5 there, what I taught this week, I think, or something. Wrath and sullenness, and then the city of Dis. But you can see in parentheses there 7, 8, and 9. So I'm giving you canto numbers. So I'm giving you sort of where you would be textually if you had the text of the poem in front of you. But I'm really basing this on a geographic navigation. All right, everything here is based on sort of moving through the poem the way Dante and Virgil would move through the poem. If I go here, you see I'm going down to the 8th circle just to show you that hell is a pretty bad place with more people packed in the lower circles where they're really bad, right? I mean, so I think in my classes this week, I'm probably already to circle 5 or circle 6, right? We still have much of the semester to go, so it's pretty obvious to tell my students, in the 2 or 3 circles that are left, we're going to have a lot going on. A lot is going to be packed into a smaller volume, a smaller space. But you can also see how complicated it is. Circle 8 is going to have all these different subdivisions. In fact, we had to create 2 separate pages from here. We have to either click on the left side here if we want to get to subcircles 1 through 5, I think it is, or 1 through 6, and here we'd have to click on the right side to get subcircles 7 through 8. So let's say we click over here on the right-hand side. This is what we call this our site page or something like that. So this would be sort of you know, kind of like the home page for circle 8. In this case, the subcircles 7 through 10. And you can see here a kind of collage of very, very dramatic depictions of things that go bump in the night and people that you probably don't want to encounter. These, we could click on these if we were in the website and we'd get sort of a full-blown illustration. These are all from Saloni's paintings, her artwork. She's a wonderful graphic design artist, but she's also a very talented studio painter. And so she did original paintings that she then sort of scanned and put into the website for the Inferno in particular. And you can see here on the left side, we have sort of groupings of different kinds of commentary or notes, the things that I would be writing for the website based on that exploration of sources and other things to try to give readers a sense of what's going on. Icons here would be sort of the things or the people or the creatures that Dante actually encounters on his journey, okay? So another word would be the encounters. The allusions might be just some of the really important philosophical or literary or mythological references that are made, even if that person is not appearing there, that something is referred to that's really important. And so students would be able to get information on that. There's going to be a gallery of artwork that's going to go with this. We're going to include not only Saloni's original artwork, but I'm going to go over to the HRC, our wonderful rare books library here, and I'm going to steal a whole bunch of images, right, and get rights to use them here because they're in the public domain and they were permission from these older sources to use here. So we're going to have 5 or 6 different artists represented in this website. We'll see some of those a little bit later. And then audio. So this is where the language part probably comes in most here. So even though I'm often teaching the Divine Comedy in translation, so sometimes I teach it in Italian, obviously for Italian majors, but I teach a class to 120 students every spring, first-year students, so obviously they're reading it in English. Or I'm teaching an upper division course that's cross-listed in English and European studies in translation. I always use a bilingual edition, and that's how I was taught Dante even in an English class as a college student. And this way, the Italian language, Dante's Italian, becomes almost a gateway for them to study Italian in other contexts. And many of the students do end up sort of doing just that. So what I do here, you'll see in a second here, is I will pick out just famous lines, just these very, very kind of compelling verses that really capture what's going on in a particular episode. And I will give them the original Italian with an audio, with the translation, but then also with an audio. And so they get to hear it and try to learn something about what's going on through that specific line. I'll give you an example here. This is an actual, so if I were clicking on one of the icons there left, and I wanted to get to this character, Guido da Montefeltro, I won't spend much time on him, except to say that you can see here intertextuality really at work here. T.S. Eliot, the 20th century English poet, will eventually use this passage from Dante as the epigraph to his famous poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. If we go to get coffee at the Prufrock Cafe in our library, because there's a very famous line here about, I think, spoons, coffee spoons or something in the poem, we would see this on the wall there. And so it's a beautiful passage. Phonetically, it's really important. The hissing of the double S's, kind of imitating the fire. Se io credessi che mi risposta fosse al mondo, a persona che mai tornasse al mondo. You can hear that double S sound through that. So it's an example where you really want the oral phonetic sounds to come out, even if it's not an Italian language class. Again, the students can sort of learn onomatopoeia and get a sense of sort of what's going on there. You can see there are little thumbnails up there for the images that sort of go with him, et cetera. So, and then the commentary, which will be based on my scholarship here on background of this particular character in the poem. If I go here to just the audio for that site page that we saw there, here you can see kind of a list of just 5 or 6 kind of famous lines, or just lines that I find from teaching over and over again are really important for the students to sort of grapple with. And we would click on those and we would sort of hear them on our iPad or iPhone or our computer, and they would sort of be able to sort of hear the original language. And then a bunch of study questions that would be helpful for the students or for teachers, perhaps. Many of the people who use the website are high school teachers. I get many emails. Sometimes I go to high schools and I talk about the website. So that becomes sort of a useful feature as well. Okay. And then the gallery, and I'm just giving you just a little snippet of one of the galleries for the Circle 8. You can see I've organized it by artist here, so Saloni's illustrations are there. If we clicked on these thumbnails, we would get sort of a full-page view, high-resolution view of the image. Flaxman, we'd have William Blake in there, the Doré illustrations, the ones that I basically could use legally, right? One of the things I decided right away with this project, it had to be open access. I didn't want to have to just restrict it to our learning management system or to a UT credentials or anything like that. So that meant that either I had to create, or Saloni and I had to create the original content ourselves, so that we had permission to use it, or we had to use materials that were in the public domain, or get permission, obviously, to use them, and that's what we did. So, I don't have illustrations here by Salvador Dali, who did some wonderful Dante illustrations that would have required a different type of permissions process. But everything here, we had obviously permission to use publicly in the website, and that was very, very important right from the start for me, the way I wanted to use it. So here's a way we would take, so now when I often teach Dante, I don't even use my website anymore really directly. What I do is I repurpose all of the different parts of it to create my PowerPoints, just to be a little bit more efficient sometimes. So I could take out here's the passage of the Gate of Hell. I guess I don't know if it'll work right off here. We can maybe listen to the Italian, one of our Italian lecturers graciously did many of the recordings here. But you can see here, you can include the image. This is the image from Blake, actually, a very famous image of Blake, of Dante and Virgil approaching the Gate of Hell, where they would be reading these lines. And this is the famous line that you see in New Yorker cartoons all the time about abandoning hope as you enter hell and things like that. So it's a way for students to sort of experience that sort of in one place. So the integration of the media, the image and the sound, was one of the features that I made sure would be sort of consistent sort of throughout here. I'm just taking these from the website basically and just putting them into the PowerPoint. Or similarly here, as we go down a little further into hell, there's a great example of Saloni's artwork. That's a very, very idiosyncratic depiction of Minos, the judge of hell. She's made him into some kind of action figure demon, I think. But she actually does a wonderful job on the tail, and the tail is kind of the distinguishing feature. Dante's taking Minos, obviously, from Virgil's Book 6, but Virgil doesn't put this huge tail on Minos, right? So Dante's sticking the tail and telling us that he winds his tail around his body is not, the number of times that correspond to the level of hell to which the person is destined. And you could hear the lines here, I think, are really crucial because we do get a sense that the sound really does drive the meaning.
Stavi Minos orribilmente e ringhia.
In Italian, as in Spanish, we trill our R's, right? Stavi Minos orribilmente e ringhia. I'm exaggerating here, but as you do that, if you trill your R, you can feel the vibration, right? Sort of going down through your body the same way the dog is sort of growling. That's not the kind of sound you want to hear, right, from an animal. So it's a great example of the onomatopoeia idea that I was putting. This would be one of the lines then that would be in the website as well. Or as we go just a little bit further to, I've just picked probably the most famous episode of Divine Comedy, the love relationship of Paolo and Francesca there. And it's also a very good academic scene because they fall in love through their reading. They're reading the story of Lancelot and Guinevere. And as they read the moment in which Lancelot kisses Queen Guinevere, that's when Paolo turns to Francesca and kisses her. And then she says these words here. And again, we'll listen to them in the Italian, I think, because it's one of those that I have the students learn even in the translation class.
Galeotto fu il libro e chi lo scrisse. Quel giorno più non vi leggemmo avante.
Galeotto is the character in the Lancelot and Guinevere story, the go-between who brings together the knight and the queen. And she is basically saying that the book and the author played that role in their love affair. As you might imagine, when you're teaching something like Dante's Inferno, at some point, and there's Paolo and Francesca saying, love led the two of us to one death. That love affair did not end up well, as the jealous husband probably appeared at some moment and killed them both with a single sword thrust. You need to account for the violence and the sex and the nudity and all of those things. Often I'm teaching Dante also, not just Dante, but all of the films that have been made from the Divine Comedy, right? Or some of the artwork, and some of it can be very, very graphic. So in an age of trigger warnings here, I tend to go to the Major Motion Picture Association and give them the NC-17 rating. Half joking, I mean, it can be funny, but it's also half serious. Sometimes, especially younger students, need to be prepared for some of the things, not that they're going to be reading, but certainly going to be seeing in a course like this. I'm not sure there's any real drug abuse in Dante's Inferno, but certainly the violence, the sex, the aberrational behavior, that's sort of, that's what it is, right? And so you do have to sort of give that kind of, at least, heads up to sort of what's coming along their way. The violence, for example, you see horrible things done to bodies or shade bodies in the Inferno. This one in particular, this is actually where Dante has a character defined this word contrapasso, counter-suffering or counter-penalty, the rule by which the punishment kind of fits the crime, right, or fits the sin. We can just listen to it very quickly here. So it's a warmongering poet who is the one who sort of pronounces this line.
Così s'osserva in me lo contrappasso.
Bertrand de Born is a troubadour poet. And the reason he's able to sort of say this is you can see his head has been severed from his body, because that's what he did to the monarchy in England. He basically created a schism or division between the king and his young prince. By the way, this is where I tell my students that Dante he invented Wi-Fi, right, or Bluetooth, right, because the head is talking, right? There's no, and after we say what a horrible joke that was, then we say, well, but in a way, it was Dante, not Al Gore, who invented the internet, because the Divine Comedy is all about a web of interconnections, and it's not only linear. As you're reading, and this is true of most epic poems anyway, but as you're reading these very complex texts, you're often linking back, right? Or you're linking forward, or you're linking to other poets as well. So you are sort of setting up this web of connections. One of the reasons I think there are so many really, really fine digital Dante projects has to do with this feature of the Divine Comedy. Anybody who's a serious scholar of the Divine Comedy is constantly working through these parallelisms, parallel episodes, these symmetries, going back and forth, making these sorts of connections. The labyrinth or the web sort of becomes a metaphor that we're using in interpretation all the time. So it lends itself very, very well, I think, to sort of a lot of what we associate with web technology in particular. You can see here another Suloni's illustration of Bertrand de Born, the warmongering poet. So going back to the original Inferno diagram, I'm just going to take us, of course, to the last circle of hell to illustrate a couple of other points that I think relate to the digital aspects relevant for Dante. We go to the last circle of hell. We'll have Lucifer, who's going to have three grotesque sort of faces or heads, a parody of the Holy Trinity. And you're going to have other characters. They're all going to be in ice, encased in ice, contrary to popular belief. As hell gets worse and worse, it's not fire and brimstone, it's actually cold and ice as we get to the last circle for treachery. You're going to have people eating one another, cannibalism, which will be sort of more of a feature of the low of the low, the worst signal, the worst sign of evil. And then as we go through here, I'll pick a couple of examples of giants. This would be one place Dante would be getting many of his references from classical literature. And what I'm going to this page for is to show you that as we get further along in the project, and as you read further along in the poem, there's obviously more for you to refer back to. So those intratextual, so intratextual meaning these relationships among the parts within the text, they become much more important and prominent in terms of determining significance. And so you can see that in the commentary here, I said, oh my gosh, this is something I can do on the web that I can't do in my published work here. In my published work, I'd have to just have a footnote or an endnote or something like that. Here I can actually start to create links within the commentary. And I'll show you in a second what happens when we click on those links, because I've already talked about this horrible Pope Darth Vader figure, Boniface VIII, in the Divine Comedy. And so I want to show him. Or with the images here, Nimrod, I can sort of click on one of these thumbnails and sort of pick out an image of him. So as I'm talking about Nimrod, we can sort of look at this image as well. Going back to Boniface, if I clicked on that link there, it opens up in a little pop-up there, basically a version of the text that I wrote for Boniface way back there in part 3 of Circle 8 or something like that. I guess if I want to go further, you can see there's another link there. I can get back to this other Pope, Celestine, who is the Pope who actually quit. He's the Pope who was in the news very much a few years back, I guess, when Pope Francis, the current Pope, took over from Pope Benedict because they went back to the Middle Ages. Has a Pope ever quit before? Yes, in fact. Celestine abdicated in the 1290s, and that enabled Dante's archenemy Boniface VIII to become Pope. So there's a very, very tight relationship between these two. So I clicked here, we would get the entry that I had written on Celestine, whom we encountered way back at the beginning of the poem. So here we are in the last circle, and these pop-up windows are they're going to stack one on top of another if I kept sort of opening up new windows, and it's going to take us all the way back to the beginning or the early sections of the poem. I'm going to show you one other sort of way to take advantage of the hypertext environment here. So you can see here, now I'm in the Lucifer entry, actually, so one of the last entries I probably wrote for the poem. You can also see the artists love it, right? So lots of images are going to be popping up there of Lucifer. If I want to get back to that gate of hell that we looked at a few slides back, I would be able to click there. But another thing I can do is I can give us Botticelli, is one of the other artists we have in the site, the famous Italian Renaissance painter, did a series of drawings of the Divine Comedy that we're able to use here. So here's Botticelli's Lucifer, and you can see Dante and Virgil climbing onto Lucifer's shaggy body, rappelling down his body. When they get to the hip or the midpoint, which is also the center of the universe, which is also the center of gravity, Virgil has to do a little flip, right? A little somersault, not letting go of Dante, I hope, right? and then they start sort of climbing down. Well, the image that Dante is going to give us as we're reading this is after he gets off Lucifer's body, he's not going to see this. He's going to be in the southern hemisphere now. He's just passed through the center of the earth, through the center of gravity, so everything is upside down. Everything has sort of been reversed. Digital, beautiful. Just flip that image back, right? Take Botticelli, flip him on his head there. That's what Dante sees, right? So I used to have to explain this, right? Or try to draw it on the board or something. Now you just sort of take it to, you know, just take the image, you flip it. It's in the website, visual parallel. You click on it there, and you sort of get that image the way that Dante says that he described it. So very, very simple. Technologically, the simplest thing there is really about the web, but it sort of gets at something that we can't really capture nearly as well, I think, just in a purely print or oral environment. Okay. And you can see here, it actually goes further here, because here's this image, one of the last images that you have in the Inferno, and anybody who's been reading carefully will think, huh, I've kind of seen that image before. And where have I seen it? And you can see here, if you clicked on the visual parallel, you would have seen it. You see the feet up and the head down. This is the Pope. This is one of the evil, corrupt popes who's sort of buried face down in one of the earliest circles, who's actually prophesying the imminent arrival of Boniface. So I keep saying Boniface, Boniface, Boniface. He's the Pope at the time of Dante's journey, the person that Dante thought of his really personal, political, theological enemy, essentially. And so as I wrote the commentary, as a researcher, I always knew Boniface was the bad guy. He's the villain in Divine Comedy, but I never realized how much so. And then when you start doing the commentary, I keep coming back to him. I keep coming back to him in my commentary. And so you see that visually here as you sort of work your way through the Divine Comedy. I'm just going to show you briefly a couple of scenes from Purgatory and Paradise. It's really, I guess I'm performing the cliche here that it's all about hell, right? I mean, I do teach the entire Divine Comedy to my upper division class. We spend as much time on Purgatory and Paradise as we do on hell. But one thing I did want to point out, so this is also related to the graphic design, the visualization. So when we got to Purgatory, Purgatory is an island mountain in the southern hemisphere, right? So think somewhere down by Australia or something like that. And the opposite of hell being sort of at the top of the world. You go down through the top of the northern hemisphere and you find it. So it's a seascape, and much of the action takes place in the early morning. And maybe some of you grew up along the coast here in Texas. I grew up in eastern Long Island, so spent most of my life either on the shore, on or near the shore, or on or near the water. And there's a very particular way the light functions, right? Especially in the early morning if you're near the sea, right? Things get a little hazy sometimes, right? And so what I told Saloni, the graphic design artist, okay, we're going to change our palette completely here. Now as we're in Purgatory, we're going to try and capture that fuzziness, that ambiguity, that kind of light that you would sort of associate with somebody in the early morning by the seashore. And you can see even here in the image of the entire mountain, it's a mountain they're going to climb up as opposed to going down. We're going to be climbing up. It already has that sort of very different color scheme. I guess the Inferno was more kind of like being down in a mine or something like that, right? Iron colored, things like that. And so you can see here some of the images Saloni will use here. Now we're using collages of her images together with the other artists' images as we go through here. If we were clicking along the numbers here, you could see I'd be going sort of in a spiral, which is exactly the way Dante moves as he's sort of winding his way up the mountain here. I'm picking out here one of, I think, her best paintings, images. This is a character in the early part of the Purgatory, the Emperor Manfred, who's been killed from sword blows to his forehead and to his chest. And you can see it's purposely out of focus, so to speak, okay? And that's what she wanted to do. That's what I told her to do. So the imagery and the colors kind of match the mood and the place that Dante sort of describes, another way in which the visual aspect is enhanced by the digital. If we go to Paradise, on the other hand, it's Technicolor. So now we're going to be in these very, very bright colors here, almost unnatural sorts of bright colors. And you can see here the different spheres of the Ptolemaic, Aristotelian Ptolemaic universe that Dante follows here. Just to give you another example here, this is Saloni's illustration. It's not for the website, it's for one of the books. After the website, and I wrote a couple of books kind of based on this, Saloni got hired by the press that I was working with to actually do some original illustrations, but you can see a very, very different kind of style from what we saw in the Inferno and the Purgatory. Here's a good example from the website of one of those bright colors I was describing earlier, and the characters are kind of in light bubbles or something like that, right? We click on that, we get the fuller image of the, but it's still the same kind of idea with the notes on the left, the gallery, the audio clips, the study questions, home, etc. Okay, so it's still working that same way. Here's where I want to talk about the public element of this. So Danteworlds has been out for a while. as you might imagine, because it's become a very popular website, not just at UT, but it's used everywhere from North Carolina to South Korea. I mean, I get emails from people, students, teachers who've been using it over the years. Much of the work I'm doing as a humanist, as a scholar, has sort of entered into the public domain. This is a quotation just from the last week. We have a new vice president for research. I haven't met this man. I mean, if you're here, let me know. I don't know, but he's our new vice president for research. But you can see how, at the administrative levels, they get it, right? They see that what we're doing as humanists has to have a public face, as I showed you earlier with Stephen Green, with Roland Green. Here, he's talking more specifically about the digital dimension of that. He says, we will help get out the word about the great work done here at UT, both to the public and to the world of scholarship and research. The digital revolution is changing the way we communicate with each other and with society at large. We need to develop new approaches to academic publishing, peer interaction, and news dissemination. So I take that as an endorsement, in essence, of some of the kinds of work that we do here in the digital areas with humanistic studies to get our work out to a larger public. Just to give you a couple of examples from my own experience with Danteworlds here, I don't know anybody at the Los Angeles Times. They clearly don't know me because it's just a professor at the University of Texas. But this is just from the website. Yeah, I don't know. At some point, my publisher just sent me this and said, "Guy, I think they're writing about you here." But so this is there. This is online too. Of course, most of our newspapers now, all of our newspapers now, if they're surviving, I know it's because they're online. Saloni gets a shout out, right? Even my illustrator, as she should, by the way. She's I don't think this website would have nearly the success, to be honest, without her collaboration. But you can see here that this kind of work then does have a public face, whether we ask for it or not, right? I mean, like I said, I don't know anybody there, they don't know me, but it still sort of gets out. I mean, a little nicer for me is when it appears in the New Yorker, right? I mean, both because I'm from there, but also it's a different venue. But it's interesting here. So what the person is pointing out, right? And again, this is from no solicitation from me or the publisher or UT or anybody like that. But what this person is, it's not a video game, it's not Cliff Notes. Okay, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that. But this person thinks that there's something specific about the Divine Comedy. Most literary texts don't lend themselves to the integrated multimedia approach that I claim for Danteworlds, but she says the case of the Divine Comedy, and then thinks of other epic poems here, right? As I think most of us would. It's a perfect marriage of medium and message, right? So what I was saying earlier about the hyperlinks and things like that, the intratextuality of the epic poem in particular lends itself just naturally, almost really, to this kind of presentation. The other thing that I would point out here is, it's a very short little thing here, but she's impressed most by the snippets of Italian. So those little audio things that I think of as really nice and in a way important. That's how I first heard Dante. I was taught that way too. I think that's great. I still remember those lines that I heard 30 years ago in that first Dante class when I call up my best friend on the telephone and we want to insult one another. We try to remember, the lines that we used in that class. But this person thought, when I listened to that line of nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, the very famous first line of Divine Comedy, right? No wonder modern Italian is modeled on Dante's Tuscan dialect, should have you susurrating in the elevator, meaning that this person would want to, a student, perhaps somebody hearing those lines would want to learn more about the language, would want to know how to say those words and things like that. So it is a way, I think it is a gateway, in essence, for the language side as well as much as the visual side. Going back to the New Yorker for a second, I just want to show you all the different ways. Once something is digital, how it gets used and repurposed. So one of the funny things they did not too long ago was a list of lists, 100 of the best lists of all time. They're going to start with the generations of Adam, and there's an asterisk there. You'll see why in a second here. And they're going to work their way down to number 1. I'm skipping here. Okay, so there's Dante, 9 Circles of Hell in at number 14. By the way, number 1 here is the periodic table of elements. 1 in 100 may be switched in certain states. I won't tell you which. So the generations of Adam or the periodic table, right, would be beautiful, right? Beautiful. But what I did, so I'm reading this along. I say, I want to see what they say about Dante here. I'm going to click on that, and that's what I get, right? So I go back, hey, yeah, no chat. Now I don't even exist, right? My name, not even Solon, we don't exist anymore. But the image is there, right? So once you have it in that digital form and it gets used and reused and it's known, then it becomes something that gets reused, repurposed, and it's a... Yeah, right, they get a shout out. Exactly, they get a shout out, right? So yeah, going back to Don Draper and Mad Men, right? So, taking my fame from Danteworlds public, then it becomes possible for me to write something for something like Pop Matters that has I don't know, 1.5 million subscribers a month or something. So you get sort of a larger audience automatically. I still do it as a scholar. I mean, I still try to be accurate in what I'm saying, but I'm trying to write it in a more journalistic way, a way that that an editor at a newspaper or magazine would not turn up their nose at that and say, oh, too academic, we can't have that. And then, but again, you can see once you're putting even a blog, right, or even just publishing something online, then you get the possibility, forget about the footnotes, right? Now you can actually just link, right? You can just link to those original sorts of things. Here, there's the Don Draper reading on the beach here. You can see he's actually reading an edition of the Inferno in the 1960s. They were very good about, the show was famous for being very particular to the time period, and so this translation by Chadwi would have been out in the early 60s, so that's the one that he would probably have had in his hands on that day. But you can see at the end of my article, I could link to the videos, right? The Coca-Cola commercial, which is in the last episode of Mad Men, which kind of I related to Dante's Paradiso, the marriage of, I guess, commerce and community or something like that, this famous Coke commercial. But you can see there's an Italian cosmonaut. She was in the International Space Station on the anniversary of Dante's birthday this past spring. She read the opening verses of the Paradiso. It's beautiful, right? As she's looking back at the earth. And so, you can have that right there, obviously, in your presentation. Or you can do something, this is a more serious venue for scholarship. This is the Electronic Bulletin of the Dante Society of America. So this would be one of my major scholarly associations. But what am I doing? I'm writing on same-sex marriage, which had just been passed in the United States. The marriage equality decision had just been made. There was a very popular memoir by a very conservative writer on Dante, a very good book. But this person was also vehemently against same-sex marriage and marriage equality. And that was kind of ironic to me, given Dante is very, very fluid on this matter. He actually treats same-sex desire and opposite-sex desire on the same footing, which is extraordinary, obviously, for his time and place, but not only for his time and place. And so it was a way for me to write something based on sort of this popularity of Danteworlds that would sort of enter the scholarly community. And you can see here I can link to all of my predecessors, my other scholar friends, and people who've actually done things on that very well. I can make the point that getting Dante straight means getting Dante gay as well, right? You can write it in that kind of way for a more popular audience. And then once you do that, lo and behold, it gets picked up by a more popular venue with the 1.4 million subscribers, right? So the same piece can then be reprinted. And this happens often, I think, with our online publishing in particular. Once it's out, you still own the rights to it and are able to sort of reprint it with acknowledgement, obviously, of the previous publication. Tomorrow's a big day, right? I hear there's a Super Bowl. It's true? I don't know. And so whenever it's Super Bowl Sunday, I flash back to 6 years ago in 2010, and this is my final example, and I think is probably the most interesting example for my students. Let's put it that way, right? When I show them this. So at the halftime show, halftime of the Super Bowl is famous for what the performance of music and also the commercials, right? I watch it for the commercials, right? So the commercials are great, and Electronic Arts, which is a huge video game company, has the Dante video game for the Inferno. And this is when it actually was launched. It was launched right after the Super Bowl, which was won by the New Orleans Saints with another Austin native as quarterback and the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to see if I can play this. I think it's a 30-second clip. And has anybody played video games? This is not the group that's big into video games. So you're going to see here just the way it was kind of promoted by the Electronic Arts. And I think you'll see from what I've already showed you from Dante, there's a lot wrong with this picture, but there's a lot of sort of interesting stuff going on too. So let's listen to this for a second. Let's see. That's Dante there in the middle. You already can see it's a little different from what we imagined. The video game was very important to me in a way, not because I played it. I did have to sit down and try to play. I got to Circle 4. That's about it. I mean, and I didn't know. I've never really played a video game of that type before. My neighbor I bought it. My neighbor had to walk me through it. They had the Xbox or the PlayStation, and a lot of violence. Obviously, Dante's a crusader here. Beatrice is this beautiful woman who's been abducted. So unlike the Divine Comedy, and this is what really galled many Dante teachers and scholars, unlike the Divine Comedy, where Beatrice saves Dante essentially, right? Now Dante has to go rescue her from Satan. So completely wrong. Interestingly, though, when I bring it up with my students, I take it seriously. I was interviewed, for newspapers and things like that. I spoke about that. But one of the things that sort of struck me from playing through those first 4 circles too even if they knew nothing about Dante, the creators of the game, or were trying not, so to speak, to really follow a lot of what he was doing, they got some things right, or they got some things wrong in an interesting way that then creates really productive possibilities for pedagogy into discussion. Just to give you one or two very quick examples, in the video game you see Dante here as a crusader, completely opposite of the scholarly, sort of stern, austere Dante. But the character in the video game is basically atoning for all of his sins. He's done all these horrible things, and he has to go through these levels of hell. Dante, the character in the Divine Comedy, is doing something similar. One of the rich interpretive themes that we sort of follow is the ways in which he has to participate in each of the different levels of hell. So it gets that kind of right in an indirect sort of way. Another thing is, in the video game, you have an opportunity as you go through the different levels to save or damn the people you encounter. Theologically, so far wrong, it's not even, worth discussing. But what makes a Divine Comedy interesting is Dante, the character, and sometimes the writer's reaction to the people that he puts there or encounters there. And sometimes there's great compassion, sometimes there's great respect. It varies tremendously. So that the game, in a way, by having the character Dante damn, or get points by damning them or saving them, does correspond in a way. And my students come up with this themselves. I don't have to even, those who know the video game, they see those sorts of connections. And not to mention the fact that I'd say that there are a bunch of students who come to my classes because they played this video game and they want to know sort of the real story. My website was used in the video game, okay? Full disclosure here, they asked me, and my publisher, University of Chicago Press, and the press and I agreed. And so they were able to, I guess when video games first go up, they usually have a website that sort of accompanies it, or if you buy the video game, there are these features that sort of go along. So they actually had the text of my website with somebody with a very, very, very nice British accent, like prominent, not me with my Eastern Long Island accent, but some beautiful accent, sort of reciting some of the commentary as it went along. What I did not agree to do, though, they asked me to be a consultant for the game. The director called me up or emailed me, and I thought about it. I said no, maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know. Today I still don't know what the right answer was. But my rationale was that the game was basically already done. And so they were going to use me or another Dante scholar as somebody to give sort of the stamp of approval. Needless to say, a colleague at another university agreed to it after I said no. But but I had to make that sort of decision. What happened, though, right after the video game commercial came out, halftime of the football game, I don't know, it probably was about third quarter at this point of the football game, I get an email. You can see the stamp there, right? I've taken out the name. My name is, and I pastor a church in Waco, Texas. I strongly feel this type of game should not be on the market to corrupt the minds of youth. I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, it was pretty bad, but I am going to do whatever I can to get this type of insane entertainment off of the market. I showed it to my students the other day, and they said, Professor Raffa, do you always get so much hate mail? I said, no, that's the only one I've ever gotten of that site. Now, I'm laughing about this. Obviously, it's not something to laugh about it. If it were something that were followed up, I'd have to do something about it, et cetera. He got my name off of the website because I, like many other people, was associated with the game. I had nothing to do with making the game, obviously, but I'm sure the same email went out to everybody who had an identifiable email. But I bring this up also to say that once we get to the public face of the humanities through the digital world, that means we're then also open to these types of things. And some of it can be helpful and some of it can be not. When I write for the Chronicle of Higher Education, sometimes there are 105 comments. They're not all very nice, right? Because there are trolls and there are other people who are going to say things sometimes that are completely off base. So that's kind of the downside. I'd say overall, though, I'm very optimistic about this digital work and the way that we bring it to the public. In fact, I would say that it's really one of the most important things that we can do today. Not necessarily to just save the humanities, to rescue the humanities, but to keep the ship, so to speak, on course. And I don't think we necessarily need to do it or should do it because we have to, but I think it's the right thing to do. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.